Welcome to this episode of Orthodontics in Summary, our first of 2025, where we'll be exploring how to achieve excellence with clear aligner therapy. This was an excellent lecture given by Mazyar Moshiri at last year's AAO winter meeting. This episode will look at how to deliver overcorrection for 4 types of malocclusions, looking at deep bite correction, anterior open bite correction, class 3 and expansion. Mars also gave some tips along the way about what to watch out for when using clear aligner therapy with overcorrection. We've got a hot tip when it comes to this podcast, and Mazyar Moshiri has very kindly given me permission to include a summary slide of his protocols for overcorrection. You can find that over at the website under this podcast. When it comes to overcorrection, it's a well-established concept within fixed appliance therapy. Mars cited some classic examples. Bracket orientation, for example. We'll offset brackets, swap, flip them. We will put in finishing bends. The arch wire itself we will distort through intrusion arches and reverse curve of spees, and auxiliaries and elastics are commonplace. Now Mars looked at this relative to the literature and said actually if we look at standardized treatment and not personalized treatment, we will see poor effects of outcomes. And he quoted a classic systematic review now by Papa Giorgio in 2020, where he compared fixed appliances to aligners and showed that statistically, using the American Board of Orthodontics objective grading system, aligners were worse off with occlusal outcomes. Now Mars's response to this was candid. He said, we cannot have a reasonable discussion of efficacy and accuracy until we study the appliances as orthodontic clinicians and not as scientists. And I do agree with Mars to a degree. It is challenging to account for all of the confounding factors when it comes to personalized orthodontic treatment, whether it's clear aligner therapies or fixed appliances. However, I do think from a scientific perspective, large cohort studies will offer the answer to this question with a degree of accuracy as time goes on. What Mars mentioned in relation to achieving overcorrection, a mindset change is required. The software has to be considered a representation of the full system, not a visual treatment objective. He drew comparisons to fixed appliances such as intrusion arches and reverse curves of speed. So, getting down to those 4 malocclusions, starting off with a deep bite. Overcorrection should be achieved by delivering an anterior open bite. Mars even quantified this as between 50 to 100% overcorrection from what is clinically desired. This favourable environment for achieving this intrusive movement, and that's if we are able to also deliver proclination as part of our goals. However, it's unfavourable if we are retracting and retroclining the lower incisors. This is synergistic and antagonistic movements taking place. The use of attachments are key to achieve anchorage. This usually takes place in the premolar region to achieve the anterior intrusion. What Mars mentioned is that there is a hierarchy of attachment design through the algorithm of Invisalign's clear aligner therapy. And actually, anchorage for deep bite attachments is 5th on the hierarchy. And this is one of Mars's phrases which I do love. And he mentioned how doctors have to be insightful and doctors have to doctor the ClinCheck itself and rely upon the understanding of biomechanics and anchorage and not just the AI to drive that process. Moving on to anterior open bite correction. So to deliver posterior intrusion, Mars recommends the use of posterior bite blocks or occlusal attachments. This achieves significant overcorrection. To aid that process of posterior intrusion, he combines it with the use of class 3 elastics, triangle elastics from the upper and lower canines to the upper first premolar, and this enhances that posterior bite block effect. He mentioned that you can get overcorrection and not to be concerned about this, and it can be corrected when it comes to refinement and having a controlled relapse as he phrased it. He also made a note in terms of biomechanics, aligners are a continuous force system, so we should expect some reciprocal anterior extrusion as part of our posterior intrusion. Moving on to class 3 cases. He described the use of retromolar tads to be able to retract the lower incisors and posterior segments in en masse distalization. He uses 6-ounce elastics on 3/16. Now, he said to watch out for the side effects of this, and that is vertical changes and increase in the curve of Spee. And he gave a really insightful analogy of retraction mechanics using a nickel titanium wire. Aligners like nickel titanium aren't stiff enough to resist these vertical forces. When it comes to correction of this increase in curve of Spee, so this can take place in refinement. And actually we should aim for anterior intrusion and resist that tendency to try and close these lateral open bites through posterior extrusion, because that's not the etiology of why there has been an interference that's occurred. The final malocclusion was looking at expansion. He describes overcorrection of 1 to 2 millimeters, and for more overcorrection the further posterior one goes. When it comes to molar expansion, he described the use of attachments, especially buccal attachments with potentially the addition of palatal attachments. This is to account for the likelihood of buccal flaring taking place. The buccal attachment allows buccal root torque to be delivered, and the palatal attachment prevents the palatal cusp dropping down. He gave a tip for this, that even if the palatal cusp is to drop down, we can place an occlusal attachment on the palatal cusp itself to prevent that process of extrusion during expansion. I really love that tip. I'll be taking it back into my own clinical practice. He also gave a tip when it came to looking at first molars. Even though occasionally we may plan not to move them, they may still end up being displaced from the arch, and Mars has struggled with this idea. And what he's described as the first molars are always a key component of anchorage, especially in the continuous force system, and placing an attachment will be important to prevent them being displaced. One of the statements that Mars made in this lecture was the use of elastics, and that was, if you're not willing to use elastics, you're not able to achieve finishes like fixed appliances. And the final statement I'd like to say for Mars was that he does not accept the weaknesses of the appliances as absolute, but rather we should be adjusting our treatment mechanics to account for them. I think that was a really succinct summary of his entire lecture. And in terms of accounting for them in our mechanics, for aligners, that really is the use of overcorrection and auxiliaries. That brings us to the end of this episode. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Please do subscribe and look forward to the next episode.